that, I want to get started with tonight's program, and I want to say a huge thank you to DEI 200, which is the Parents Group Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for District 200, and Anjali Bharadwa, the amazing Anjali, who has worked so hard on this series and has brought together all these amazing panels from our own community. So I'm going to hand it over to her. Thank you so much, Anjali.
Thanks, Courtney. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you all. So Courtney, you wanna go ahead and confirm that you can see it? Okay, great. All right, so first a little introduction. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Anjali Bharadwa. I am a Wheaton resident here, first generation American, born in, my parents were born in India. I am a local mom. I've got 3 kids in the district, one at Madison, one at Edison, and one at South. I don't have any background in talking about race, but I do try my best. I'm actually a Microsoft consultant, and I just, try to be an advocate as much as I can. I am the creator of DEI 200 and the CUSD 200 Equity Task Force member. So just to tell you guys a little bit about DEI 200, it is a relatively new group we started just this year, but our mission is to amplify all voices with dialogue and action for District 200's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and strive for everyone in our community to have a sense of belonging. So not to go into it in too much detail, but just so you guys are aware of it, we are trying to do activities like student engagement, where, doing things that we can try to address content that is taught in the classroom, perhaps provide alternate resources, doing student engagement and awareness outside of the classroom as well. So content that could be taught in an advisory or club setting. We also are trying to get the community engaged as well. So, things like today, educational discussions, multicultural days, book clubs. Obviously, things have not been everything that we wanted to be during COVID, but we have lots of big plans for our future. And also doing some outreach. So reaching out to communities that haven't participated much in the past. Perhaps we need to address times like childcare, and listening and really gathering information about the current feelings of how things are working in the district, basically in our community. As Courtney mentioned, this is part 4. So we've gone through this Talking About Race series. Today is Becoming Anti-Racist. And so, one of the things that we've been going through this process and kind of getting deeper and deeper each time. Today, we're really talking about solutions. Courtney, I think you have one of the polls to be able to ask about the interest. Is that right? No.
Yes, let me go ahead.
I don't know if they're on the same poll or different polls.
Oh, you know what? Yeah. I think it asks them all at once this time.
Yep, that's fine. So go ahead and we have a couple of questions out there. Like Courtney mentioned, we are thinking about it for our February 4th event. And so we'd love to hear if you are interested in participating in one where these last 4 have been more, we're presenting information to you. We would like everybody to be involved in the conversation now. So if you could go ahead and answer those couple of questions. Also, how many sessions have you been to? And how knowledgeable are you on what it means to be anti-racist? So I'll give you guys all just 30 seconds or so to answer those questions. Courtney, let me know when we have a good amount and I'll continue.
Okay, that's good. 83% of you answered.
All right.
Can everyone see? Oh, okay. Can everyone see?
Yes. All right, so we have a lot of new people coming here for the first time. So we'll try to be, I'll try to be a little bit more, I'll give you a little bit more of a background of some of the things that we talked about. So part 1, just for anybody who missed those different sessions, part 1 was about colorblindness and how that can contribute to racism. Really back in the 80s and 90s and maybe even early 2000s, it became kind of this popular notion that if you were to say that you're colorblind, that's like the right thing to do, and really how that can be harmful. So that was part 1. Part 2 was being open to a discussion. We talked about Robin DiAngelo's white fragility and how the sensitivity to talking about racism also perpetuates racism, and really what white privilege means, not necessarily that your life hasn't been hard, but your skin color hasn't worked against you. Part 3, we really dive deep into systemic racism really affecting the specific experience for Black Americans, and how, based on the institutions in our country, have worked against them. So we really dug deep into that. All 3 of those sessions are on the library's YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen them yet, I recommend taking a look. So part 4 today, we are talking about becoming an anti-racist. So over on the left here, what you see is the anti-racist wheel, trying to be able to go from the fear zone to the growth zone. But really the definition is people who are actively seeking not only to raise their consciousness about race and racism, but also to take action when they see racial power inequities in everyday life. Being an anti-racist is very different from being just non-racist. So our agenda for today, I'm going to give you guys some foundation on being anti-racist, similar to how we've done in the previous discussions. I'll keep this one a little bit shorter because we really want to focus on solutions today. And then we're going to go into the Q&A with the panel. And I'm really excited about our panel, really great, diverse panel. So we'll get into their introductions here right after the foundational set point. So obviously, you can't talk about being an anti-racist without talking about Ibram X. Kendi. He's an American author, professor, and historian of race and discriminatory policy in America. He often talks about the idea that there's no such thing as a non-racist, aka the myth of neutrality. In a nutshell, it's not possible to be neutral when it comes to racism. Anything that is not anti-racist is racist. This is because all policies and ideas either advance or hamper equality. So as an example of what Kendi believes, racist policies have created funding imbalances between Black and white schools. Therefore, a scholarship program open only to Black people is anti-racist because it strives for educational equality between racial groups. Axing this scholarship program because white people aren't allowed to apply may seem neutral, but in fact, canceling the program would be racist because it would mean canceling a policy that is aimed at remedying the current funding imbalance and thereby promoting racial equity. Another key idea in Dr. Kendi's teaching is about anti-racist response to being told that you've done, said, or supported something that's racist. And I just want to read this quote by Dr. Kendi real quick. Racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist one minute and anti-racist to the next. And that's something that, you know, has really, there's a myth behind it, that there's this spectrum between racist to anti-racist. We're kind of the myth of the position of anti-racist is someone who is immune from racism or from acting in a racist way. Actually, scholars teach that it's a big part of being anti-racist is acknowledging that you've had internal racism, that you can act in ways that support things that are racist, as a big part of anti-racism would be to acknowledge that and then working on to dismantle racism within ourselves. As we've learned in our last 3 sessions, everyone has racial biases. Our culture and our media are all rooted in racial inequity. So just by the nature of growing up exposed to this type of content, we will have racial biases. Even for those who work to examine their own racism and unlearn racial bias, we're never immune from saying or acting or supporting policies in a way that are racist. An important thing is that we recognize that this is a lifelong journey of self-improvement and self-evaluation. I also want to bring back in Robin DiAngelo's white fragility teaching from part 2, where she said a person of color in one of her seminars said that people accepting feedback that racist behavior with grace would be revolutionary. I think it's really relevant to Dr. Kendi's teaching, and a big part of what anti-racism is examining ourselves. So there are a whole bunch of steps that Kendi has laid out in his book. I'm not going to obviously review his whole book here, but a couple of other key takeaways is that racism was created to justify policy, and policy was created to financially exploit Black people for white wealth. And so a lot of his ideas is about policy and ideas and not about people. Another notable takeaway is that people are trying to educate and create love first when he argues it should be the other way around. Put the policy in place first and then people will come around. So policies are around desegregation schools changed in the 1950s and 1960s, and only later did white people support the change. Policy around interracial marriage changed in 1967, but most people didn't support it until later. And lastly, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, was implemented in 2010, and it is far more supported now than it was back then. So next, that's our whole foundation. I promised to keep it short today. I think I did. We're going to get into our questions, our Q&A panel, and we're going to kind of break these down into a couple of different categories, so to speak. Racism in yourself, racism in a community, racism in an individual, racism in institutions, and also overstepping. So these are some of the questions that we have prepared. We're going to also invite you guys to ask your questions as well, as Courtney mentioned. So go ahead and put those in the chat as you think of them. You don't have to wait for us to ask, just go ahead and put those Q&As in, and we will definitely get to them. But first off, we need to do some panel introductions. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen and start with some panels. So I'm just gonna go in the order that I see you guys on my screen at least. So Erica, you are up first. Also, sorry, with your introductions, talk about why this topic is important to you.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Nelson, and I've lived in Wheaton for 23 years, and I've raised 2 adults. So I'm at the other end of the child raising. My daughter's a kindergarten teacher out in Alexandria, Virginia, and my son is a May 2020 graduate from college, navigating the whole craziness of job search and adulting and all that good stuff. They both grew up here in Wheaton. I'm really grateful to be a part of the conversation. I represent the Wheaton Community Relations Commission, and this is my 3rd year as a member. The CRC, and I'm just going to read to you our purpose statement. We had a meeting last night where we've just updated a lot of our documents, which is great. So I'll just tell you what we do. We're the catalyst to connect all people, make them feel united within the Wheaton community through events, key partnerships, and opportunities to give back to Wheaton. I teach college students, and I'm on a local board for the Glen Ellen Children's Resource Center. This is important to me. This is an important conversation as this next one in the series, because for me, being involved in social and economic justice issues, especially as an educator, is how we make what we just talked about, Anjali, and that is sustainable positive change in policy and programs, and then ultimately who we are as people. So that's why I think this is such a critical series, but also a really critical topic. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Limaris Pueyo, you're up next.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Limaris Pueyo, and I am the Director of English Learners and Equity with District 200. And I am currently serving in that capacity as of July 1st. I have a background in education with 13 years experience, classroom teacher, administrator. I was over at Glenbar District 87 for 8 years as an administrator in various roles. I was born in Puerto Rico, moved to Chicago when I was about 5-6 years old. When I came to the Chicagoland area, I only spoke Spanish, so English is my second language. Personally, the topic of equity is something that I'm deeply passionate about. My own personal experiences, growing up in a low-income poverty neighborhood, and getting my pathway to college, I realized that my educational opportunities were not the same as other students. And that was really what drove me to education, because I felt a passion and need to just help other students like me. I believe in students, and I want students to be successful. I am the first in my family to obtain a bachelor's degree. I am the first in my family to obtain a doctorate. So I definitely believe that if I did it, the other students have the ability to do it. They just need our support.
Awesome, thank you. Grace, you're up next.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Anjali, for having me. So yes, my name is Grace Legaspi. I am a pediatric clinical pharmacist at Lurie Children's Hospital. But today I am here as a Filipino-American, first generation, and a very proud Wheaton mom. My husband and I moved here in 2015, and we liked it so much we decided to stay. And really, the topic of racial injustice has become very important to me in the recent months because of what has happened in the recent months and the climate that we're currently living in. And also the realization that my daughter will be growing up in a community that, quite frankly, is not as diverse as the communities that we have grown up in. And we want to do our part to make sure that she continues to love Wheaton the way we do.
Awesome, thank you. Mehret, you're up next. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Mehret Asgedom, and I came to America when I was 5 years old, right into the heart of this community with my family. We came as refugees, and I grew up going through the school district here, District 200, started at Longfellow, graduated at Wheaton North, and have been really blessed to have the opportunity to come back and teach. I'm teaching in the district. I've taught for the past 12 years. I had taught at Franklin. I'm at Wheaton North now. And just, I have a real heart for people who are on the fringe or don't feel like they belong, because so many of my experiences have been shaped like that. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to reflect and to share and to have genuine and honest truth-telling conversation that has a posture to heal. I think that is the most productive and significant part, that we posture ourselves in the heart of moving towards healing. And there's a lot of healing to do. We're talking about 400 years of systemic racism and beyond that, right? So there's a lot of work to do, but there are good people doing a lot of good work, and I am grateful to be a part of that.
Awesome, thank you. Terrance, I don't know if you guys want to go together. I'm excited to have our first couple as panelists.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Terrance Garmon. This is my wife, Jessica. She'll introduce herself here shortly. But first and foremost, I want to applaud the Wheaton Public Library. I think that the first step in approaching this type of topics is to have these discussions and to have them intimately with different perspectives. I myself don't coin myself as an expert on race or racism, but I'm just honored to be able to share my story and some of my experiences so that others may learn from what I experienced, my ideas are, and my potential solutions may be to certain things. And so I'm just very fortunate and gracious to be on this panel. I did not grow up in Illinois. I grew up in Texas, born and raised there. I went to law school here in Illinois, and where I met my wife, and she's from here. And so we decided the best place for us to raise our kids. And so when I moved here, I really wanted to be in the community. I know there's a lot of stigma that's in the world today about Black fathers not being present in the household, not being present at all. And so for me, this is very important because I want to be out there. I want my face to be out there, be approachable. I want people to know that, Black fathers are there for their children. And so this is very important for me. So thank you all for having me.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica. I am Terrance's wife. I do want to thank the 108 participants that I see on this call. I applaud you for leaning in to such a conversation that can be uncomfortable. I think it's so important for you to see that there's a need for change, and I applaud you for wanting to be a part of that change. So thank you. Thank you to the Wheaton Public Library and then all these beautiful panelists. So thank you all for being here and adding your input. I am COO and Chief General Counsel for the Will Group and the President of Industrial Electric Supply. A little bit about the Will Group is a company founded by my father. It's named after my grandfather, William Edward Davis. He was a domestic butler for a Caucasian family in the South. And he had a third grade education, but he was the smartest person I've ever met in my life. When you would see him, you would stand up a little bit taller. He was just a remarkable person. And back in the South during Jim Crow laws and segregation, it was unusual for a Black man to be very close to a family. And he was so close to them that they named their son William after my grandfather. So I am just so incredibly proud to be a part of that legacy and to be here in Wheaton. My most important job is wife to my husband, but also mom to our two kids. We have a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and one on the way. And I went to St. John Lutheran Preschool in Wheaton. I went to Reesbrook Elementary for kindergarten and then through 5th grade. And I went to Hubble Middle School and then Wheaton Warrenville South High School. So Wheaton has been a tremendous place for me and my 8 siblings. I grew up in Wheaton. My parents, Tanya and Steve, were phenomenal. My mom made sure that we had a Black History Month program when there was not one and where I grew up in Wheaton. But growing up in Wheaton, I had champions here. I had people like Mehret and her family. They were phenomenal. But I did hear comments like, you're smart for a little brown girl, or comments about my hair or the color of my skin. And I did know that I was different. So this conversation is so important. And when we're all doing this collectively together to make awareness and to make it an environment that's safe for all of our kids here in Wheaton.
Awesome, thank you. We've got so many lifelong Wheatoners on our panel today. And we will have another one too, and our first student, Morayo, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariah Laripo, and I'm a senior at Wheaton North. I am also vice president of our school's BSA, and that's Black Student Alliance. And I've been in a lot of panels at our school to discuss equity and equality and how to improve that. A little bit more about me. I went to school in the inner city for about 5 years until I moved to this area. And it was very jarring for me to see the differences because I used to grow up with kids that look like me, to seeing very few people that look like me here. So now I have a little brother who is going through the system as well, going through, he's actually in Washington right now. And I hope to be a part of this conversation and help make the community a place where he can feel comfortable and talk to almost anyone, feel comfortable sharing his story as well. So I hope to do this the first step in sharing mine. So.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for being here. So I'm just going to share my reason for why it's important for me too. So I'm just somebody that when I recognize that something is unjust, I have a hard time ignoring it and I want to do something about it. So I always see that, I also see how skin color plays a role in our lives here in Wheaton. It's for me as well as my children, and it might be different from how other panelists experience it. We're often looked like as foreigners, and that often has like a sense of giving children, no sense of belonging. So I want to not only make it better for my kids, but for all kids here in Wheaton. So I'm going to start out with a question for our student. We would be remiss to not talk about the terrorist acts that happened yesterday at our Capitol building. So for Morayo, how did you feel watching the difference between the response yesterday and over the summer versus over the summer to the Black Lives Matters protests? Is there anything that you wish you would have heard from your teachers today?
Yeah, so definitely the rhetoric surrounding the incident that happened yesterday versus what happened over the summer with the protests is really interesting to see unfold. Especially coming from our president, who is the figure and the leader for our country. It was really disheartening to see the response. And even from some of the people that I know that are closest to me, to see the response of what happened yesterday. Seeing everyone gathered for a cause that they believe so strongly in was very interesting to see. And many people died, unfortunately, like about 4 people, which should be 0. And I do wish that some of my teachers could have brought it up, made it a discussion point, talked about it in any way, at least brought it up, because these events are really important. We're going to be talking about it for hundreds and hundreds of years, and seeing how that affects us right now, seeing how that affects students like me, seeing people gathered for such a cause, is really disheartening. And I do hope that we feel more comfortable bring up topics like that, and even comparing it to what happened in the summer. Black Lives Matter is such an important movement for the equality of not just Black people, but for all minorities. So bringing up those different groups in discussion can really help bring the conversation forward, and I guess progress our country a little better.
Awesome. One of the things I wanted to mention too is we want to have a very organic conversation here. So does anyone else want to add, especially with everybody is on their mind and looking at the news of what's been happening?
I do want to add that it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to have feelings and emotions about what happened yesterday. It's okay to express hurt. A lot of the images yesterday were very jarring, and it was historic. It will go down in history as a day that really resounded throughout America. But I'm so happy that we're talking about it. We recognize that what occurred was wrong, and we are doing what we can to bring awareness and talk about it and hopefully make a difference.
I would just add that I think, as I was watching it yesterday, the thing that popped up the most to me was the amount of hatred I saw on everybody's face. You see different scenes, you see people, talking, chanting, but it's not just the expressions of hatred. And it's not hatred that's oh, I don't like you, but it's hatred that's been manifested and passed down from generation to generation. It's hatred that's been inherited essentially over centuries. And so, at times I think people think that, oh, we're not racist. We're not a country of racism. Racism doesn't exist. And it's there. It's every day. It's on TV. You can see it in people's faces, people's voices, people's frustration. And I think going back to the difference between the summer protests and what happened yesterday, I didn't see as much hatred. I saw a lot of frustration. I saw a lot of anger based on systematic racism killing minorities and it being justified. And so I think those are really 2 different aspects to really pull apart from there, and to really distinguish the 2 things that happened we saw yesterday versus last summer.
Perfect. All right, so to get back in a little bit more into anti-racism, Mehret, the next question is going to go to you. Being able to recognize your own racial bias is an important step to becoming anti-racist. We just talked about it from Dr. Kendi's teaching. None of us are exempt, all of us in this panel included. Can you think of a time when you noticed growth in the ability to recognize racism?
Yes, thank you. Before I answer that question, Morayo, I do want to respond to you and say thank you for bravely sharing that and sharing what you needed today. And I'm sorry that you didn't get what you needed today. The conversations did happen. Not all classes had them, but as a school, we are working so hard to try to be there in a way that is meaningful during hard times like this. And you voicing that helps, and it's important. And I just want to say thank you. And and just acknowledge that. So thank you. I think this question that you asked, Anjali, is the heartbeat of whether or not any systematic change will work, whether or not friendships will be able to last through hard differences, right? Because really, we all have it inside of us. And the way we respond to ourselves and the grace and the ability for us to respond to ourselves is going to play out in the way we respond to others. And let me explain what happened. And I'm gonna speak to your example, Terrance. And I am, this is vulnerable for me to share. It's hard for me to say that this happened because it shows the ugly that was inside of me. And I hear you as my Black brother, and the stereotypes that are put on our Black brothers about fatherhood. I remember, if you guys remember the old Jewel, the small Jewel, I don't know if anyone remembers that. I remember one day I was standing outside, I was actually in my car, and I saw this man. He was this gentleman, he was African-American, and he was with his son, and he was about 3 years old. I was like, oh, that is so cute. And then the next thought in my head was, oh, he probably just picked him up for Halloween. Gonna take him trick-or-treating. Probably won't see him again. And however, maybe Christmas. Like, I don't know what the rest of that thought was. And like, I sat there with the horror of that thought, right? Like the weight of that thought. I'm someone who, I'm Black, right? But if I go to certain parts of Chicago, they'll be like, you're not Black. And they're like, you act white. And if I am here, I'm definitely Black. If I go home back to Ethiopia, they're like, oh no, she's American, she's white. So I have been everything and nothing at the same time. And what that has done in my heart is created the space of like belonging everywhere, right? And so my inability to process that thought at that time, I actually became stuck. I didn't know what to do because I hated that I thought that thought and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have the tools, I wasn't equipped. And over time, I have learned that our system, our society, history, has perpetuated this hate, right? For our African brothers. And I'm the last person who wanted to admit that I was a part of that. I'm the last person. I love my older brother. He is an incredible father. If anyone said anything about him, I'd be like, oh, you do not know. You don't know, right? I'd be like the first. And so like to see like the paradox of like the ugly and like the reality of like what my core, like who I want to stand for and believe in was so different. And so I believe the posture that, and this is part, maybe we can explore this later, but the posture that I have towards myself is part of how I respond to others and how I can be able to navigate then, well, what do I do with that? Do I just sit on it and pretend like it's not there? Because what will happen is I will think I'm anti-racist and I'll just ignore it. And then my heart will get hard and I will not be able to have meaningful conversations that are healing. And so I I just, that was the one time. I know I have had other thoughts, but that was the one that like struck my core, my heart. And I felt ill-equipped to handle it. Looking back now, there's this sense of, we normalize it. Like there's this understanding, like, first of all, if you look at the history of America and how it has been set up to the Black male, right? Like they want to hate themselves. That's how it's set up. It's just hate, whether it's white on white, black on black, like white on black, excuse me. And so systematically, over the course of history, that is what, and that's what you see, the rage that you see, the fear that you see when or that you feel when you experience situations with Black men that don't seem safe to you. That's where it comes from. And there's a lot of untangling that needs to happen. So I know that's kind of deep and kind of like threw it in there, but it's ugly, and we start here.
Yeah. So I think that's the important part, right? Is like recognizing that we all have bias within ourselves, right? And that our first step is to somewhat acknowledge it. You know, I'll also share a quick one too. I had an appointment with the interior designer because I was an interior designer trying to come, and the lady who showed up for the appointment was an older Black lady, and it actually took me back when she first came, and I had to evaluate in my mind, well, why did it take me back? Why was I not expecting an older Black lady, right? Because in my own mind, I had a different vision of what a designer looked like, and so even though I am somebody who is working on this work, and like you said, it's vulnerable to admit it, right? I had a racist thought, and I had to acknowledge that it was a racist thought. And the reason why I was judging somebody based on their skin. And I had to be able to think that process through and realize that it has no at all reference on whether she can design my house or not. So it is something that I think everybody could definitely work on. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. Our next question, I guess anybody else want to jump in on that? I'm gonna just kind of look for your guys' microphones to be unmuted. So if you do want to jump in, unmute. So Erica, my next question is to you. How do you see yourself addressing the issue of understanding culture? How can you do that when you are part of the problem or part of the perceived problem?
Yeah. I've thought a lot about this, and some of what Mehret said, who I've now known for a few years, and we've worked together on a really neat little plug for the Community Relations Commission, our Festival of Cultures, which is a really great opportunity for the community to come together, made me think about, in this answer, this idea of understanding culture from an experience that I had when I was working at Mundelein College, which has since been merged into Loyola University in the early 90s. So it's been a long time since I've been there. I took a couple of students out for graduation to celebrate with them because they were student leaders that I worked with, and one is an African-American student. We went to a restaurant north of the city, and as we were leaving, I looked at her and at the other student, and I said, I'm so proud of you. Gave them both big hugs. One student was white, one African-American. And as we got to our cars, she looked at my African-American student. She looked at me and she said, I had such a great time tonight. And she said, so if I seemed uncomfortable, it's because when I'm in a situation where I'm literally the only Black person in the room. And I'll never forget what she said, which is, I think, brought this to bear for me. She said, I feel like I'm wearing a shoe that's a half a size too small. And it was this recognition for me that I don't have that experience. I didn't feel uncomfortable. And so this idea of culture is kind of defined, it's holistic. We have to, really be thinking about everything that each of us brings to the table. So when I see myself in partnership and community with the people on this panel, and with the folks who are here tonight wanting to have this conversation and be a part of it to learn, I think it's about relationship and being willing to join, being willing to become, right? Becoming anti-racist, to be anti-racist. Kendi's book is so powerful in that. And so for me, I have to dig deep and understand culture, because the reality, the second part of the question really is about, being a part of the problem or being perceived as a part of the problem as a white female. I remember when my husband, we bought a minivan and moved from Hyde Park in Chicago and did the slow crawl to the western suburbs, then to Oak Park, and then to Wheaton, right? Bought a minivan, and I looked at him and I said, I don't want to be a white suburban woman. And he said, you are a white suburban woman, right? So just this recognition all the time of just being who we are. And if I'm perceived as being part of the problem, then I have to acknowledge that being white is privilege. It has given my kids privilege, and my husband privilege. It's not that we don't work hard. It's not that we don't struggle. It's not that I paid my way through college. I did a lot of things that everybody else does. But I know that when I was in that restaurant with my student, I didn't have to be conscious of what she was conscious of. And so when I'm walking around and I got a pair of shoes on and they're too tight, it brings me right back to that moment. And that is a good thing for me, because this is about that sense of learning. And there's a comment in our chat that I want to acknowledge, and from Regina, and she talked about the importance of getting to know one another's history. And that's part of being a solution, a person and a problem solver, is that we have to get knee to knee, and we have to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and also that sometimes we are part of the problem. So I have to be okay with that, and I am, because it leads me to being in partnership and community with others.
Awesome. There was a question in which I don't want to get lost too far back here, but there was a question that Terrance, I'll put out to you if that's okay here. But why were yesterday's events racist? It was in the chat. Sorry, I offered you up.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I know yesterday was, politically motivated. But I think when you look at that on top of the racial spirit events that's occurred over the recent years, when you have political leaders who refuse to denounce white supremacist groups, organizations that are based on hatred, based on racism, groups who are known to be part of the events that happened yesterday, I think that's why, in my mind, racism is a byproduct of what happened yesterday.
And also, and I encourage everyone else on the panel, if they have something to add, I think it'd be great, because this question is a good one. But there were also nooses that were brought to the event, and to the person that asked the question, what a noose is historically, it was used to hang Black people. It's a noose to put around your neck. And so that symbol alone, it's seen on white supremacists as tattoos. It's laid out in people's yards. It's sometimes thrown in windows. But the very symbol of a noose is racism on its face. So that's how the activities yesterday could be considered racist.
Yeah, I would say also, just picking up on the issue of symbolism, that I started in the more, I was, obviously working at home like a lot of us are, but kind of back and forth between meetings. And I just felt my heart go from being broken, watching the halls of Congress be taken over, to the symbols, which is what, Jessica, you're talking about too. And I think it's a really important piece of acknowledgement is that if we don't get that, we got to educate ourselves about that, because that is fundamentally and foundationally information we need to learn to understand the pain of that. When I saw that one image of a man, a white man holding the unfurled Confederate flag, that symbol has meaning. And we have to acknowledge that. It was horrific. I don't know. I don't have any words for yesterday. I'll be perfectly honest with you. But those symbols, we have to know. We have to understand.
I think I saw somebody with like Auschwitz on their sweatshirt too. So there's plenty of different symbols there, but I think that actually plays well. And
the saying was Camp Auschwitz.
Okay.
So the anti-Semitism, I mean, the complete lack of regard for pain and murder and race.
And I wish all of the attendees could read what people are writing, because there are so many beautiful, heartfelt thoughts that are being sent to the panelists. And actually people are adding other events that sparked out to them as racism. One person even wrote the police treatment of Black protesters versus white protesters, or the delay of the National Guard arriving, or the reenactment of the George Floyd murder on the Capitol stairs. I personally worked in DC. I was a Capitol Hill staffer many years ago, and you cannot get through any door without going through extreme security measures, metal detectors. You have to get your bag checked and reviewed, and they will even wave the monitor to check to see if there's metal on your body. So to see the halls that I once walked as a young, naive staffer trying to change the world, to see all that infiltrated by so much hate with all those symbols of racism, is why those images were so jarring and hurtful to so many people yesterday. So I hope that answers your question to the person that did pose it today. Anyone else, please jump in. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah, I just want to add, first of all, I commend you for asking that brave question, because you asked it to a group that you knew probably felt differently than you. And so it takes bravery to do that. And I'm grateful that you asked it. That to go with that, I'd also like to read a quote from one of my mentors, Dr. Tracy Scott. And he spoke to why it felt racist, right? Or why it was racist. Today is white on white violence. It looks and feels different than violence involving, be it Black Lives Matter or a Black person's interaction with the police. Privilege equals tolerance, restraint, and composure. Just think what would have happened if the Nation of Islam stormed the Capitol. And not just the Nation of Islam, any African American. They would have never gotten to the windows. There would be blood. It would just be a different story. And so when you see people parading around with props from the White House, right? And just feeling like it's their living room, and knowing that like you yourself as an African American would be dead if you tried to even enter. It does become a race thing, right? So.
Yeah. So I think this actually plays really well into our next question, where sometimes people believe that the color of your skin have nothing to do with the situation at hand. So Grace, this question is going to you. How do you address the denial the role of skin color can play in a situation?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, that's a difficult question, but I think one of the ways that I can answer that is through sharing a story that an incident that occurred with my family earlier this year. So what happened earlier this year was someone had printed a poster of a mock Asian president and decided to tape it to our tree on our property. And so naturally, me and my husband were offended by that. So we posted, we had written to our community group about it, and we really got a variety of responses. I would say that the vast majority of people were deeply saddened that something like that had occurred, but we did have a handful of people who didn't see it. We got kind of responses that were like, oh, well, this isn't about race at all. It's a political joke, or this is just a silly teenage joke. Or, you know, there was a poster at the park, so this couldn't have been an attack on your family. And it kind of highlights the different things that other people can see. Some people will look at that and see, well, maybe it is just, it's like an Asian person, you know, they're pretending that this person is trying to run for president and it's just a funny thing. But being an Asian American, what I see is someone who is making a mockery of an Asian person and posting it on my tree, but no one else's tree. No one else in the near vicinity, that is. So it's interesting that people see those different things, because what they see is very different from what I see. And I think those kinds of comments, they come from a very good place. They come from a place where they're trying to make us feel better about the situation, but really it's dismissive and it kind of devalues our experience. But another reason that I want to share this is because there was one incredibly moving response that we received. And I am paraphrasing here a little bit, but it was something along the lines of, you know, if this really was like a silly teenage joke, maybe we as parents should take this opportunity to talk to our children, to talk to them about, you know, the unintended consequences to our actions and how people perceive things differently. And to me, that was like, that's the best of Wheaton. You know, that was the anti-racist response. If people are asking, how can I be an ally to people of color, it's having that sort of mentality and saying, you know, being able to reflect on someone else's situation and taking action in however small a way. You know, something as small as saying, I'm going to talk to my kids about this, and, you know, leaving room for growth.
That's excellent. Thank you, Grace. And thank you for sharing the story too.
Mm-hmm.
Mehret, did you have one you wanted to add to it? No, okay, sorry, you unmuted. All right, my next question goes to Limaris. We're talking about, okay, here's the question. If you received feedback that something that you had done or said perpetuated racism, how would you want to approach receiving that feedback, and what actions might you take?
So the first thing that I would want to do is really listen and understand that other perspective, because, you know, I personally obviously would not, you know, want to perpetuate something like that. But if I did receive the feedback, I need to be able to understand, you know, what it is that I did and how is it that my actions made that other individual feel. And so it's important really just to admit and own up to it. The time to make excuses and, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or you took it the wrong way. No, that's not what it's about. It's really owning up to what happened. And that is a learning experience for me. That is going to become an opportunity for me to reflect on my own personal beliefs and how whatever the action was, and just learn from the experience and learn from that person, because that's really the only way that we can learn and grow, is just really trying to develop that understanding of that other side and trying to put yourself in the shoes of that person. And what is it, how is it that I caused that particular type of pain? And what can I do in the future not to do it? But the reality of it is that you're going to have to sit with that discomfort, and you're going to have to just sit with it and grow from it and try to not obviously, you know, do the same act again. But I just really want to say that the important thing is really just to accept it and not try to make excuses for your actions, because that's really not the approach to take.
Being willing to learn is definitely key. Anybody want to add to that one? Looking at you guys all.
I was going to say briefly, this ties into a little bit of what we're talking about with solutions, but I love what Limaris said, because it's that willingness, like I said before, to kind of just accept it, to say, This is, if someone has felt that or has that perception, our goal is to help break it down and to be willing to be a part of the conversation. And it's hard to not be defensive if the intention truly was not to be heard in that way. But that willingness to say, wow, thank you for that, builds our capacity. So thank you. That was great.
Awesome. All right, my next question is going to go to Morayo. As the VP of the Black Students Alliance, what works for effectively dismantling racism within our community? So what conversation are you having with your peers?
Yeah, so I feel like this ties really well in with what Dr. Pueyo said. Listening and understanding is so critical and important for dismantling racism. I feel like the conversations that I've had within my community and people coming up to me and asking like what's your experience with these situations? How have you experienced racism in our school? Stuff like that. Those are really hard questions to talk about, especially as a student. And I didn't always feel comfortable talking about my experience with racism. I remember my sophomore year, I finally felt slightly comfortable to talk about it with one of my peers, and I got shut down. And it was really hard for me because I am really passionate about activism and sharing my experiences to whoever I can tell. And for the first time talking to one of my peers and being shut down so quickly was difficult. Eventually I found my confidence again, was able to continue those conversations, but just being able to listen and understand. Unfortunately, that peer wasn't able to listen to my side of how I perceived the problem that we were talking about. But having discussions, especially in our BSA meetings, are really important. And I feel like the first step to anything, to fixing these problems that we face in our country. So
Awesome, thank you. And I'm so proud of you for sharing too, especially as a student. I think it's really brave. So my next question goes to Terrance and Jessica. So what are the effects of stereotypes or racist comments that are made about a group of people, but that treat you as the exception?
Sure. So growing up in Wheaton, I was often the only person of color in so many of my circles. I think I was the first Black captain of the Wheaton South cheerleading squad. I think when people get comfortable around you, or they think that you reach a certain social status, they believe that you're not a person of color. I mean, that does happen. And it still is hurtful, but you have to have the courage to say something. And I have to be vulnerable and admit that I haven't always said something. I haven't always spoken up. And I hate that I've been a coward in some situations and I haven't said something, but my goal is to do better and to encourage others to speak up. I don't know why it happens. I believe that when people get comfortable around you, they just assume, even singing songs with the N word in it, and you're the only person of color, that stuff still hurts, and that still stings. And it's so important that even if it is a group, you can still say something without being confrontational. You definitely can. What are your thoughts, Love?
Yeah, and it's extremely, extremely hard, especially if you're the only person in a social group and something does happen, for you to be able to speak up. My wife would tell you I'm a person, I don't really like to share a lot of things a lot of times. So it's, something I have to work on, is to be able to correct people, because they think, oh, just because, you're an attorney or you live here, we're not talking about you, we're talking about those people over there. Well, why are you talking about those people? It's because of the color of the skin. Well, my skin the same color as they are. You don't really know my background, what I've been through, because I haven't shared those experiences with you. But I will say it is an opportunity to educate, and maybe even if it's, you take the person aside and you have a conversation one-on-one, so you're in more of a comfortable setting to be able to discuss those matters. I think that's more beneficial. I think a lot of times we're expected to just turn the other cheek, to just smile and go on. I grew up playing sports, and so a lot of times on the sports field, you'll get people who may say something very hurtful, a racial slur of some sort, and then when you retaliate, people only see your retaliation. They don't hear what's being said. You may have coaches that say, "Oh, that's all they said. You can just deal with it. Just get over it." But that stays with you, that defines you, that molds you, that defines your personality. And then you start to be that person who's in the back of the room and something is said, you're not being anti-racist. You don't have the ability, the training, the experience to be able to speak up and to say what's on your mind because of those past experiences, to where you were expected to just smile and just walk away. And that's extremely hard.
It's so hard. I would agree with you. And then something happened to us even, 5 months ago. We built our home in Wheaton, and we were getting some just tile installed in one of our guest bathrooms. And the tile installer was super comfortable. Anyone that comes in our house, we want to make sure that you feel comfortable, have something to drink. That's how our parents raised us, with COVID guidelines, of course. So making sure. But he was not a person of color, and the debate was on TV, and he made a comment. He was just comfortable with us, and he said, "Well, why does it matter that the police are killing Black people? The Blacks kill each other anyway." And I remember I was just I started sweating because I was just so upset that at that moment in my home with my children, you forgot where you were, you forgot what your audience was, and there is no excuse for any person dying. One Black shooting is enough. And so the fact that he thought it was okay to say that he thought it was justified, was very hurtful, and it helped us realize that, wow, we have to speak up, we have to do better, we have to educate, because comments like that, people feel that way, and we have to correct them, and we have to help make a change.
Well, just one last thing I will say, that to that point, educating turns into argument. It's a very thin line. And so it's really hard to navigate that, because you want to educate and to say how you feel and to say what's on your mind, but then it may turn to argument. It may get heated, it may get tense. So you have to be able to, and this is very, very hard, you have to ascertain of when you feel like you said your piece, that you think that you've said what the other person needs to hear, and then walk away.
Yeah.
I don't recommend standing there and arguing, because that doesn't really get you anywhere at that point.
I see a follow-up question in the chat to, is the onus on people of color to educate those who are employing racist logic against them? Throw that out to anybody who wants to try to take it on.
You say that one more time?
Sure. Is the onus on people of color to educate those who are employing racist logic against them?
The onus is on everyone. It's not just the person of color's responsibility. It is everyone's responsibility. We're all human. We all have a heartbeat. We have blood that runs through our veins. And so if it doesn't pin you or hurt you to see someone else treated less than just because of how they look, then lean in and examine yourself and see why doesn't that bother you? Why does it not bother you for a human being to be treated poorly? So it is not the person of color's responsibility. That places more of a burden on that person of color. It's all of our responsibilities, everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, and we used to get asked all the time about our personal ideas or thoughts on certain events that may go on. And over time, you get to that point to where it's kind of like everybody expects you to be the person to be able to explain everything, even though everybody's been through grade school. Hopefully it's been taught in the schools. Hopefully, things that happen when people experience it before. as far as maybe seeing things or had their own interpretation. And before, I used to be so tired of having this conversation over and over and over. But now I look as an opportunity. And so, the more people I'm able to, tell my side of the story or how I feel or what I believe is right, I think, we need more people to understand racism, understand the history of racism, especially in America, to be able to, speak up when something doesn't happen. Because people don't speak up, then hatred, racism wins, and we can't let that happen.
I do love the saying, silence is compliance. So Erica, continuing with that conversation of, if you're having a conversation with an individual and they might say something that is racist in nature, what works for effectively dismantling racism within a conversation or within an individual?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's already been said are some of the pieces of that. When you think of the word dismantle, for me, it really means breaking apart, breaking down. And a lot of what Terrance and Jessica just spoke to, I think, is about that. Someone in chat talked about the fact that people who are white, I need to be their term upstander, which I love, right? Because it lifts this all up. We've got a surface in order to break it down, to understand why we are where we are and why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And when I served on a local school board, not 200, but District 41, because I'm in that part of Wheaton that goes to the Wheaton School District. But when I served on that board, it was such an awakening for me over 3 terms serving, to see the growth and change and the importance of these conversations in a school district that went from looking one way to looking very differently 12 years later, like all of our suburban school districts have. Just that the beauty of how inclusive we became, moving to an inclusive school community curriculum model. That is what, those policies and programs is what creates, systemic positive change, is my hope. But I think it goes back to something that was mentioned earlier. We have to be willing to sit down. We have to put time into this. We have to do something that is just cognitively difficult for us, which is to withhold judgment, because the moment someone says something, we have a reaction to it, right? So it's retraining ourselves on some level. I know I'm speaking from my own experience and what I try and do, and it's to act toward that instead of react. Because even in just those 2 seconds in your mind, when you say, okay, Erica, the future Erica will not be glad you said that, right? You need to take that step back and say, and use those, every course we've ever taken in communication is those I statements, right? I'm offended by that. Not for her or him. I'm offended by that. And this is why. So we have to find that language and be willing, the willingness to speak up. I have a necklace on, it says speak up. A really good friend of mine gave this to me. I think it's because she thinks I have a loud mouth, but part of our voice is to remind ourselves that we have to do this. So I think it's withholding judgment, being willing to wait to talk, respect that someone has been hurt, offended, and to understand why, right? What's the intention or purpose behind that? And it takes a lot of work. It has taken a lot of work. For me, I raised my kids with a good muscle for justice, because like Morayo, you are shifting our world. You are making us better. And we need to set the table for you to do that.
Perfect. Says, my next question was from Morayo too. So that one goes, and it actually lines up really well with one of the questions that I see in the Q&A. So really talking about your experiences here and what tips do you have for what either you could have done or what other people could do around you to help when you are having a situation that's been really uncomfortable for you?
Yeah, so You know, I've faced the backhanded compliments, the outright racist remarks, and it's definitely uncomfortable to try to handle. And um, sometimes I feel like I'm not equipped with the right tools to go out and handle them. This kind of goes into like other stereotypes that are perceived. Me being a Black woman, I don't want to be that angry Black woman to start arguing or start having an actually meaningful conversation with the next person that will just turn into an argument. So I feel like mentally I also have to like draw the line between what I can say and what I can't say, always trying to refrain myself. I feel like in these situations, especially with my peers, they know better. So if I hear someone make a racist remark, and then I give them like eye contact, they realize them there, and then they like stop talking. I feel like maybe making other people aware that I'm still in this space too. I'm here, I'm present. Even if I'm not here, I'm still here. Just know that I deserve the space that maybe others were given so freely. I feel like sometimes I have to work even harder to be a part of the same space. So those situations just every day can be so uncomfortable. But I think in other ways, just speaking out, trying to educate and stuff like that can help with these, help reduce these uncomfortable situations, help educate people, and help them know what to say in the right situations. And I would have loved if the people around me that also heard it. For me, I feel like I have to step back, but for others, I would have loved if they stepped in, said something that's not right. And I've had situations where my friends have stepped in and said like, that's not right, that why did you say that? But I do hope that it can occur more often.
Having the power of somebody to stand by you is really, really strong. Also the eye contact, I do that with my kids all the time too. All right, my next question goes to Grace. How does race play a role in the healthcare system, and how do you address the mistrust people of color have in it? And how does this relate to our current situation with COVID-19?
It's a big question, but also a very important one. I think the current pandemic has really put a magnifying glass on the racial disparities that have been put in place due to the healthcare's history of systemic racism. We're seeing that, you know, there's a disproportionate amount of people of color who are dying due to COVID when you compare them with their white counterparts. And we're also seeing, I believe like a recent survey had come out that I think it's around 40% of Black Americans are saying that they're going to opt out of the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's something that's really serious and we need to address. The first part, I think, is that we need to address that the mistrust is there because the racism is there. We put it there. You know, this is a famous trial within the Black community. I don't know how many people outside of that know this, but the Tuskegee trial, I wanted to mention, like in the 1930s, where 400 Black men who had been diagnosed with syphilis were recruited by doctors into a clinical trial, and they were told that they were going to receive free healthcare, when in fact the purpose of the trial was to find out what happens to people when you don't treat them for syphilis. So those men went on for 40 years without treatment, well after penicillin was discovered as the cure. And they went on to give syphilis to their family members and their children. And that kind of, the effect of that, just that single particular trial, I still think resonates today with the African American community. So the mistrust is there because we put it there. It's also in every individual, in everyday individuals. You see it with doctors who are less likely to treat Black men for pain because of the perception that they might be drug seeking. So we need to address that it's there. I think how we can fix it, from a systemic level, that's a huge issue. I think we definitely need representation. We need to be encouraging our people of color, our children of color, to aspire to higher degrees in the medical field. We need more Black doctors. We need more Latinx doctors. We need people who are making the clinical decisions to represent the minorities in the community. I think that will help garner trust. I also think we need to improve access, because you can't trust somebody that you can't make contact with. And we need to promote healthcare to our fellow people of color. You know, we really need to promote and say, you know, hey, find a physician that, or a healthcare provider that you truly trust, and have an open and honest conversation about what you care about and what still worries you.
So while I did want organic conversation, I noticed that we're about 10 minutes away from the end here. So I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in, and you guys are chatting away, so I can't keep up with you, but I'm gonna skip around a little bit. So Mehret, my next question is for you. Why is representation in teachers so important for you? Oh, you're muted.
I believed that I could be a teacher in our district because in second grade, I had Mrs. Turner as a teacher. She was an African-American woman at Longfellow Elementary, and she taught me to passionately fall in love with Harriet Tubman. I saw myself in her, and I believed, I did not even second guess when I was applying for schools. I didn't even second guess whether or not I should apply in our district, because that had been a rich part of my formative experience. I believe representation matters. We as empathetic human beings want to be able to say, I hear you, I see you, right? And there's something special about being able to see yourself in someone else and being seen without words, having a connection that really says that the system is for you, right? And so that's why representation matters. I am grateful to work alongside colleagues that bend over backwards to, I'm thinking if I can just jump on, there was one question that hit about teachers in the district. And I just, you know, I have worked with, at least in the field of history and social studies, I co-taught with Susan Warwick and Mr. Bonamy at Franklin. I'm with Mr. Zeglin at Wheaton North, and these are teachers who listen, who respond, who really want to meet the needs of their students in incredible ways. And we study rich, you know, African-American history. We cover it. And in our government class, it's not history, but current events. If something comes up, we don't push it aside. Like we take it on and take on those hard conversations. And I'm so appreciative of that. But I also know that our district wants to grow, right? That there's room for growth. And I echo that. My heartbeat is right there as well. And so I'm just really grateful for the representation that's been a part of my life. You know, I think about Miss Morgan, who looked at me at Wheaton North and spoke things into my life, and she had a special role. And she's an African-American teacher. To this day, she's like, I can say, you know, a very special part of my life. It matters. It really, really matters.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I also wanted to just add that even though you're not a teacher of color, you can still connect with your students of color. And it's really, really, really important, because what students are looking for, they're looking for a trusted adult. They want genuine relationships. What it really gets down to is, does this teacher care about me? Care about me with respect to academics, but as an actual person. And so, although it's important that we have teachers of color, it's also important that those teachers that are teaching students of color are able to establish those relationships. And so for our students of color, like, the messages that we see in society and everything around us is telling us that this is not what you should aspire to. We are getting different messages. So it's important that we see professionals that look like us, so that we can also try to achieve those goals and aspire to those professions. Very, very important. But at the same time, it's also important for those relationships. And I know that there's a lot of awesome white teachers out there that do an amazing job with students. And it's really important. It really boils down to those critical and key relationships. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Awesome. I think relationships are so important. I think that there's one question that does come up a lot, and I'm going to actually throw this out to everyone. I had this originally for Mehret too, but what are good ways to be an ally and supportive without being performative, a white savior, or overstepping? Is there a line between being supportive and overstepping which could hurt the movement? I know that it's a question that I've had too, is somebody who's not Black, but also is trying to help provide a platform for people to speak out, is at what point should we step back, right? So there's a lot of questions I hear often. This comes up, especially in conversations that aren't as diverse as this panel is, to know, when should we be quiet? All right, you want to start us out?
Sure, yeah. If we look at this question, the last word is movement. If we step away from that word and step towards humanness and humanity, then there's a whole different spin to it, right? Because now it's not about trying to be a part of something outside of you, it's being part of who you are. And so anytime you feel injustice or something is wrong, that is that is part of your humanness. You step into that, right? If you see injustice, or if something feels uncomfortable, or if something is wrong, there's a check inside of you. Listen to that check and speak into it. If you hear someone say something to someone, and just say, are you okay? Like, I don't know what happened, but I just want to check in, and let them know, like, you acknowledge that something was off and you don't know what happened. Now it's not a movement anymore, and it's a human connecting to a human and caring about someone else, right? That makes it less likely that it's going to be someone that's just trying to get a bunch of selfies on their social media showing that they're in the fad of being racially, sound or secure. We genuinely just need to be good humans to each other. And that means being responsive and taking those brave steps, like Jessica was talking about earlier and Limaris was talking about, when having those brave conversations. Yeah, so it's less about a movement and more about being human to one another.
I want to respond to that, that piece of the question that we had kind of talked about and was raised for me, and this idea of being perceived as a part of the problem, or being the white person to come in and help out and, be that de facto fixer or whatever it might be. And I think that's part of the problem. If that's your mindset, as for me as a white woman, if my mindset is I'm going to go in because they need help, right? That is completely antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish. I want to be a part of this conversation. I want to care about my students. I want to understand the needs. And and how to help people. Limaris said this, you know, supporting that term, to support, because it's my profession. It's the right thing to do. It's who I am, you know, consciously, right? It's that well that I draw on. So I think that's that piece of dismantling goes back to catching ourselves when we're, you know, conscious of not being in it for the right reason or purpose. And that is around this topic, but it's around a lot of other things people do also. Is so it's challenging ourselves to be, you know, to kind of unlearn some of that behavior, but also to Mehret's point, right? It's not just being part of a movement because it's the thing to do. It's consciously connecting to it and knowing that that's a part of, you know, us. So good point.
I just wanted to add, you know, I don't expect after this that everyone gets out into the streets and starts marching for Black Lives Matter. Like, sure, that would be wonderful, but I recognize that, you know, that's a lot for some people. Honestly, I think making the change is really just talking about it at home, you know, saying, you know, to your uncle or your friend, hey, you know, that's not right, right? And something simple, something small, and I think it could still make a huge difference.
Terrance and Jessica, did you guys have something you wanted to put some final notes? I did see you off mute.
It's okay. I hope this is related to your question, but I preface this thought based on, you know, my dad, he's been in law enforcement for over 40 years now. I have a brother who's a U.S. Marshal for the past 10 years or so. So I've, you know, been born and raised around law enforcement my whole life. Yet, if I get pulled over tomorrow, you know, my heart thumps, I start sweating, all these things start racing through my mind. Okay, what do I do? Put my hands on the steering wheel, look for it. So I'm having this checklist internally before I meet the officer based on my perception of what's been played in media, based on personal experiences with some law enforcement officers, not all law enforcement officers, but some. And so in those situations, there are times to where you get upset or angry. And so in that situation, you're in a position to where it's not wise to speak up or to argue. But I think that's where it's really important for people who are not people of color to be able to step up and say, hey, what's going on, to inquire, to try to de-escalate the situation if something that is racial based and unjust is going on. And so I think it's really important for you know, for people to be able to step in those situations, to recognize what's going on, and to help de-escalate those situations. So you know, it's not that preconceived conception of this is you know, a vicious Black male or an angry Black woman, but you have somebody who's on the outside who's able to intervene and to kind of give a voice of reason in that situation.
Awesome. So it is 8:31, but does anybody have any last thoughts that they didn't get to put out there yet?
I just want to just say thank you so much for this forum, this opportunity to have just a vulnerable conversation. To Grace's point, tomorrow everyone's not going to get out and make a change that's going to occur and change the entire world. But every conversation that we have about it is making a difference. Everyone that is interested in asking the questions, asking those uncomfortable questions, and trying to understand what truly is the root of the problem, then we're getting somewhere. So I just appreciate all the panelists and also the attendees who are here in Wheaton, hopeful that we can make our kids in this community even better. It's a great community. Can we improve? Absolutely, we can all improve. But I'm just grateful that we're having this conversation. This wasn't happening when I was a student. So I'm just so grateful, just so incredibly grateful for this opportunity. So just thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
And I just want to echo that too from the bottom of my heart. Wheaton is a wonderful place with loving people. Our school district is incredible with caring professionals that are that really are dedicated to trying to do it right. And I just want to encourage us. The last thing I guess I'll say is stay in hard relationships, uncomfortable relationships. If you love someone and you disagree with them, don't leave. Press in. My closest friends are supporters of political parties that I am not, right? And it is really uncomfortable. But this is where it becomes, you learn to elevate love over difference. And our country needs to do that. And the more we do that, the more we'll win as a nation.
Awesome. I know also everyone remembers to expand their circle too. Not only keep the relationships that you have, but look for new ones too, right? Like if you look around and everybody looks like you, try looking somewhere else. Form some new relationships as well. So I won't keep anybody any longer. We're about 4 minutes over. Courtney, I'll hand it back to you guys, but thank you panelists for joining me on this this difficult conversation.
Yeah, all I have to say is thank you all for joining us, and thank you to this fantastic panel for sharing your personal stories. And to everyone, just kind of stay tuned. The Wheaton Public Library, we want to continue this conversation. Like I said, we are working on an event for February 4th, where hopefully the community, you, the audience, we can talk face to face and have more of these discussions in small breakout rooms on Zoom meetings. And we hope to have more panel discussions like this in the future. And we are recording this. It'll be available on our YouTube page within a week. So thank you all for joining us, and let's continue the conversation. So thank you all, and good night. Stay safe and healthy.